Hour zero, 72 hours. That's what Dylan Cormack said, standing in the briefing room at Forward Operating Base Granite Peak, with his arms crossed and that smirk spreading across his face like oil on water. $20. $20 that she'd be crying for evacuation in 72 hours. The bet hung in the air between them, casual as smoke, cruel as a blade. Corporal Thea Blackwood heard every word. She always did. But she said nothing. Just set her pack against the wall, lowered herself to one knee, and began field stripping her M110 SASS rifle with the mechanical precision of someone who'd done it 10,000 times in the dark. The room watched. They always watched when a new operator arrived. Watching was how you stayed alive in special operations. You watched how someone moved, how they talked, what they did when they thought nobody was looking. First impressions weren't social in this world. They were survival assessments. Can I trust this person with my life? Thea gave them nothing to assess. She broke down the rifle, bolt carrier group, gas piston, barrel extension, cleaned each component with movements so economical they looked choreographed, reassembled, function checked, adjusted the Night Force 8TCR scope, dry-fired twice into empty air. Satisfied, she set the weapon across her knees, leaned her back against her pack, and closed her eyes. Not sleeping. Anyone who'd spent more than 5 minutes around professional operators knew that breathing pattern. Controlled. Measured. The rhythm of someone running mission scenarios in their head, rehearsing contingencies, mapping decision trees before the first shot was ever fired. Real social butterfly, Cormack muttered to the man beside him. Petty Officer Liam Sullivan, 30 years old and silent by nature, glanced at Cormack but said nothing. Sullivan had learned early that the smartest thing you could do in a room full of veterans was keep your mouth shut and your ears open. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Brennan sat down near Thea. Not too close, respectful distance. He was 34, with the weathered face of someone who'd spent half his life in places where the sun was an enemy and the sand got into everything, including your soul. You need anything, Corporal? Chow? Water? Thea's eyes opened, gray as winter steel, flat as pond water before a storm. No, thank you. 5 words, soft but final. Brennan waited, giving her the opening to say more. She didn't take it. He walked back to Lieutenant Commander Garrett Steele, the team leader, who was studying satellite imagery for the 4th time that morning. She's either the real deal, Brennan said quietly, or the best actress I've ever seen. Steele didn't look up from the maps. Which do you think? Watch her hands. Steele did. Thea was checking her rifle again, running her fingers along the barrel, the scope housing, the magazine well. The movements weren't nervous. They were reverent. The way a surgeon handles a scalpel. The way a musician handles an instrument they've played since childhood. That's not taught, Brennan continued. That's lived. Steele finally looked up. His eyes were the color of autumn leaves, and they'd seen things that made other men wake up screaming. 14 years in the SEAL teams had taught him that sentences starting with, "You're not going to like this," never ended well. What did Grayson tell you about her? Brennan asked. Classified unit, specialized training, above our pay grade. That's what he told me too, but that's not what I'm asking. Steele closed the folder. The room had gone quiet around them. 7 men pretending not to listen while listening to every word. Her father, Steele said, voice low, Nate Blackwood, retired Army Ranger, served with Grayson in Mogadishu, 93. Pulled him out of a Black Hawk wreckage while taking fire from 3 directions. So this is about debt. This is about a lot of things. Steele's jaw tightened. Grayson didn't say it outright, but I got the impression that bringing her here, it wasn't just professional. Personal? Family. Brennan processed that. In the teams, family meant something different than it did in the civilian world. You didn't just trust family with your life. You trusted them with your death, with the manner of it, with the knowledge that if you went down, they'd make it mean something. He owes the father, Brennan said, so he's giving the daughter a shot. That's my read. And Cormac? Both men looked across the room. Dylan Cormac was 32, broad-shouldered, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite by someone who'd gotten bored halfway through. He was the best breacher on the team and the worst diplomat. He'd been in bar fights on 4 continents. He'd once told a 2-star general that his tactical plan was, quote, the dumbest thing I've heard since my ex-wife said she was faithful. He was brave, he was skilled, and he had absolutely zero filter between his brain and his mouth. Keep him on a leash, Steele said. That leash has been fraying for 6 years, Garrett. Then tie a new knot, 14 months earlier. The review board met in a windowless room at Naval Special Warfare Command in Coronado, California. 3 men in dress uniforms sitting behind a table that looked like it had been built specifically to make people feel small. The kind of table that said, we have power, you have hope, let's see which one wins. Thea Blackwood sat across from them, back straight, hands folded in her lap. 28 years old then, hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. Eyes forward, expression neutral. Corporal Blackwood, the board chair said. He was a captain with gray in his hair and ribbons on his chest that told stories about places where the official story was classified and the real story was worse. This is your 3rd application to basic underwater demolition/SEAL training. Yes, sir. Your test scores are exemplary. Physical fitness is exceptional. Marksmanship, he paused, glanced at the file. Marksmanship is, frankly, remarkable. Thea said nothing. Compliments were traps. You waited to see where the blade was hiding. But you have no combat deployments, no team experience, no record of operations in a unit environment. He closed the folder. The sound was very final. Application denied. Thea stood. Understood, sir. She walked out, down the hallway, past the photographs of SEAL teams from decades past. All men, all hard, all looking at the camera like they just walked through hell and were ready to do it again. Past the memorial wall with the names of those who didn't come home. She didn't cry. She never cried. In the observation room above the board chamber, Colonel Everett Grayson watched her go. 58 years old, with silver hair and eyes that had seen the worst of humanity and somehow still found reasons to get out of bed in the morning. He'd been standing there for the entire review, arms crossed, saying nothing. You could have spoken up, said the captain who'd led the board. Grayson didn't answer immediately. He was thinking about Mogadishu, about fire and screaming and the taste of blood in his mouth, about a young ranger named Nate Blackwood dragging him out of a burning helicopter while rounds sparked off the metal around them like demonic fireflies. No, Grayson said finally, not yet. 21 years earlier. The rifle was almost as long as she was tall. Thea was 8 years old, standing in the dirt behind a farmhouse in rural Colorado, holding a Remington 700 that her father had modified to fit her smaller frame. The stock had been cut down. The scope had been adjusted. It was still too heavy, but she didn't complain. Complaining was for people who wanted things to be easy. Her father had taught her that the day after her mother's funeral. Nathaniel Blackwood, Nate to everyone who'd served with him, and nobody who hadn't, knelt beside his daughter. He was 43 then, with a kind of weathered face you got from spending 20 years in places where the locals shot at you and the landscape tried to kill you just for existing. You feel that? He asked. Wind, Thea said. Not just wind. Listen to it. She closed her eyes. The wind moved through the valley like water finding its level, curling around the rocks, accelerating through gaps in the tree line, creating eddies and currents invisible to the eye. It talks, Nate said, if you're quiet enough to listen. Inside the house, Margaret Blackwood lay in a hospital bed. They'd moved into the living room because she was too weak to climb stairs anymore. Stage 4, cancer. The doctors had given her 3 months. She'd made it to 6 through sheer stubborn refusal to leave before she was ready. Breathe out, Nate said. Slow. Thea breathed out. Let the world go quiet. She let it go quiet. Now. The rifle kicked against her shoulder. The target 200 yards downrange, a paper plate stapled to a hay bale, jumped. When Nate walked down to check, there were 3 holes within an inch of each other. He walked back, didn't smile, didn't need to. You got your mama's steady heart, he said, and my patient eyes. 2 weeks later, Margaret died in her sleep. Thea was sitting beside the bed, holding her hand. She felt the exact moment it happened. The way the hand went from warm to cooling. The way the presence in the room changed from occupied to empty. She didn't cry then either. At the funeral, Nate gave her the rifle case. This is yours now, he said. Your mama wanted you to have something to hold on to. Something solid. Thea held the case like it was the only real thing left in the world. The briefing started at 0500 hours, which in mountain time meant it was still dark enough that you couldn't tell where the earth ended and the sky began. Colonel Grayson stood at the front of the room beside a map of the Rocky Mountain wilderness that looked like God had crumpled paper and then spread it back out without bothering to smooth the creases. Gentlemen, he said, then his eyes found Thea. And Corporal, here's the situation. He clicked a remote. A red circle appeared on the map. 12 kilometers north of this position, we have confirmed activity at what we believe is a militia weapons depot. Intelligence estimates 18 to 22 hostiles, lightly armed, minimal tactical training. It's a catch-and-tag operation. We go in, we mark it, we get out. Air support does the rest. Timeline? Steele asked. 36 hours. Insertion at last light today. You'll move under cover of darkness, establish observation by dawn, confirm the target, then extract through the primary landing zone, here. Another click. A blue circle appeared. Cormac leaned back in his chair. 18 to 22 militia types with small arms. We're sending 8 operators for this? 7, Grayson corrected, plus 1 attached sniper. Every eye in the room turned to Thea. She sat in the back, perfectly still, watching the map. She didn't look at any of them. Weather? Brennan asked. Cold front moving in. Expect temperatures between -10 and -15 Celsius. Possible snow. Limited visibility after midnight on day 2. Comms? Standard encrypted, no local support. If something goes wrong, you're 20 kilometers from the nearest quick reaction force. The room absorbed that information in the way that professional soldiers absorb all information about things that might kill them. Quietly, completely, without drama. Questions? Silence. Then, from the back of the room, so quiet that half of them almost missed it. Separation protocol? Everyone turned. Thea was looking at Grayson now, those winter gray eyes steady. Grayson frowned. Say again, Corporal? If separated, rules of engagement. The room shifted, not visibly, but the air pressure changed. Because that wasn't a question you asked on a routine reconnaissance operation. That was a question you asked when you'd been separated before and knew what it felt like to be alone in hostile territory, with no backup and no clear way home. Steele spoke before Grayson could. Primary landing zone here, he pointed. Secondary here. Both are denied or unreachable. You execute escape and evasion protocol. Head south. 20 kilometers to FOB Granite Peak. Follow terrain. Avoid population centers. Understood. That was it. 2 words. Then silence again. Grayson studied her for a long moment. Something passed between them. Recognition, maybe, or understanding. The kind of look that said, you know something we don't. The briefing continued. Medical contingencies, ammunition distribution, call signs and challenge codes. The usual machinery of planning that took a simple idea, go somewhere and look at something, and turned it into a complex ballet of logistics and contingencies. Thea listened to all of it, didn't take notes, didn't ask follow-up questions, just absorbed the information the way stone absorbs sunlight, silent and complete. When the briefing ended, Brennan approached her. "That question you asked," he said, "about separation. You been separated before?" Thea looked at him. "Yes." "What happened?" For a moment he thought she might not answer. Then, "Came back." 2 words, fast, rotors beating the cold air into submission. Inside, 9 people sat in the kind of silence that comes before violence. Not peaceful, not comfortable, just waiting. Thea sat at the rear, rifle between her knees, eyes closed. But anyone who understood the telltale signs of operational readiness knew she wasn't sleeping. Her breathing was too controlled. Her posture was too deliberate. She was running the mission in her head. Every phase, every contingency, every decision point. Steele watched her from across the compartment. He'd spent 14 years learning to read people in high-stress environments. Most operators dealt with pre-mission tension in visible ways. Some checked their gear compulsively. Some made jokes to break the pressure. Some went quiet and internal. Thea did something different. She went still. Not relaxed still. Predator still. The kind of stillness that came before sudden, explosive action. The crew chief held up 5 fingers. 5 minutes. Thea's eyes opened. She checked her rifle one final time, then secured it across her chest. Stood. Moved to the door. The crew chief gave her a look. "You sure you want to be first out?" But she just waited, patient as stone. 4 fingers. 3. 2. The helicopter flared. Wheels touched dirt. The door slid open and freezing air rushed in like it had been waiting for permission. Thea was gone before anyone else had unbuckled. By the time Steele hit the ground, she was already 20 meters into the tree line, a shadow among shadows. He counted heads as the team dispersed. 8 operators plus 1, all accounted for. The helicopter lifted, banked hard, and disappeared into the darkness. Then they moved. Cormac took point, Sullivan behind him. Steele at center with Brennan. The others filled in the formation like puzzle pieces clicking into place. And at the rear, where the most dangerous position in any patrol formation always was, Thea settled into the rhythm of Tail End Charlie. The first 4 hours were textbook. Security halt every kilometer. Visual sweeps. Audio checks. The team moved through the wilderness like water flowing downhill, following the path of least resistance, adapting to terrain. Thea moved differently. Brennan noticed it first. He'd look back to check the rear position and find nothing, just trees and snow. His heart would skip. Where did she go? And then she'd materialize 5 meters to the left of where he expected, already set in a covering position, rifle up, scanning sectors. "That woman moves like smoke," he whispered to Steele during a security halt. "Good smoke or bad smoke? The kind that kills you before you smell it." They moved on. The temperature dropped. The wind picked up. The mission clock in Steele's head counted down. 33 hours remaining. Then, at 03:47 hours on day 2, everything changed. Steele saw them first. 2 shapes moving along a ridgeline 400 meters north. Dark silhouettes against darker forest. Moving with the casual confidence of people who thought they owned this terrain, he raised his fist. The patrol froze. Before he could assign a shooter, before he could even key his radio, 2 shots rang out. They came so close together, they almost sounded like one. A single rolling crack that echoed off the mountain walls and then died into silence. Both shapes on the ridgeline dropped. One crumpled straight down like someone had cut his strings. The other spun halfway, tried to catch himself, failed, and fell face first into the snow. The team went flat, weapons up, scanning. Every operator looking for the threat, trying to find who had fired, where the rounds had come from. Steele turned around. Thea was prone behind a fallen log, rifle still shouldered, eye still in scope, finger indexed along the receiver. Her breathing hadn't changed. Her pulse, as far as anyone could tell, hadn't changed. She'd killed 2 men in under a second and looked like she was waiting for a bus. 2 down, she said. Quiet, factual, like reporting the weather. The team stared. Cormac's mouth opened, closed, opened again. No sound came out. Steele found his voice first. Good shooting, Blackwood. Copy. That was it. Nothing else. No explanation. No acknowledgement of how extraordinary that shot had been. 400 meters, moving targets, near total darkness. And she'd made it sound like routine maintenance. Brennan moved up beside Steele. His voice was very quiet. That was 400 meters, 2 targets, dark, moving. I know. That's not Army marksmanship school. I know. That's something else. They moved on. Nobody mentioned what had just happened. Nobody needed to. The arithmetic was simple enough. 2 shots, 2 kills, 400 meters, near total darkness. Either Thea Blackwood was exactly who her file suggested, or she was something more. Either way, the dynamic had shifted. Cormac stopped walking with the swagger he'd carried since they left the FOB. And when Thea passed him to retake the rear position, he stepped aside, a half step, barely noticeable, to give her room. It was the smallest gesture in the world, and it meant everything. The attack came from 3 directions at once: north, west, south, muzzle flashes lighting up the darkness like strobes. The distinctive crack-crack of AK-47 fire mixed with the deeper thump of RPG launches. The sound hit half a second after the light, and by then Steele's brain had already processed what his eyes were telling him. Not 18 to 22 hostiles, not lightly armed, not minimal tactical training. This was 35, maybe 40 fighters. Organized, disciplined, moving with the coordinated precision of people who'd done this before and knew exactly what they were doing. Ambush! Steele's voice cut through the chaos. Break right, into the ravine. The team moved like a single organism. Years of training compressed into pure reflex. Suppressive fire left, bounding movement right. Cormac throwing grenades. Brennan dragging hospital corpsman Jason Whitmore, who'd taken RPG shrapnel in his right arm and was screaming through clenched teeth. Chaos. Absolute chaos. The kind that kills you if you stop moving for even 1 second. Steele led them into a narrow ravine. Rock walls on both sides. One way in, one way out. Terrible tactical position, but it was the only cover within 200 meters. He pressed his back against cold stone and started counting. Brennan! Here! Cormac! Here! Sullivan! Here! Whitmore! A groan. Here! Weak, pain-threaded. Ashford! Here, sir! Kyle Ashford, 22 years old, voice shaking but weapons still up. Kane! Here! Barrett! Here! Steele paused. 7 faces stared back at him in the darkness. 7. Where's Blackwood? Silence. The kind of silence that lands like a stone in deep water. Sullivan spoke first. She was at the rear, right behind me. I turned when the first RPG hit, and she was there, and then... He trailed off. Then what? Then she wasn't. Nobody had seen her fall. Nobody had heard her go down. In the chaos, the smoke, the noise, one person had simply vanished. Cormac's jaw worked. The man who'd laughed at her 72 hours ago, or would have if this mission had started 72 hours ago, if time meant anything anymore, stared into the darkness where Thea should have been. His voice came out stripped of everything except raw truth. 72 hours, he swallowed. I give her 72 hours before the cold takes her. A pause. If the enemy doesn't first. Steele closed his eyes. 1 second. That was all he could afford. Then he opened them because there were 7 men who needed him alive and focused. And somewhere out in that frozen darkness, there was an 8th who might already be dead, or might be doing something none of them could predict. This is what happened in those 3 seconds. Thea saw what the team couldn't see. While everyone's attention was forward, dealing with the ambush from three sides, she was scanning rear and flank because that's what tail-end Charlie does. That's the whole job, and she saw them. Third element, 8 fighters with 2 PKM machine guns, moving fast through the trees, on a vector that would cut the team's retreat route in exactly 90 seconds. She did the math instantly, the way some people do arithmetic or remember song lyrics. Automatic, unavoidable. If Lieutenant Commander Steele kept pulling his men back along the planned withdrawal route, they would walk straight into an L-shaped ambush. Crossfire from 3 sides. No cover. A wounded man who couldn't move fast. Everyone would die in under 3 minutes. She couldn't radio. OPSEC during contact was absolute. Any transmission would reveal their frequency and position. She couldn't shout. Sound discipline. She couldn't fire a warning shot. Same problem. 3 seconds. 3 options. All bad. Option 1, follow the team. Watch them die. Die with them. Option 2, hold position. Try to suppress the third element alone. Die. Team still walks into ambush. They die too. Option 3, disappear. Move around the enemy's flank. Clear the route from a position they won't expect. Possible they think she's dead. Possible she actually dies. But possible the team survives. Thea chose option 3. She dropped into a shallow depression in the ground, pulled snow over her legs, her torso, her pack, controlled her breathing, slow, shallow, through her nose so no vapor plume would give her away. The enemy element chasing the SEAL team passed within 12 meters of her position. She counted boots, 14, smelled cigarette smoke, heard them talking, voices excited, the sound of men who believed they had their prey cornered. She let them go. Then she moved, not toward the team, away from them, around the enemy's flank, through terrain that would have been suicidal to cross in daylight and was merely insane in the dark. She moved the way she'd been trained to move since she was 19 years old, since the first time someone had handed her a rifle and said, "If you want to live, learn to be invisible." 10 minutes per position shift. Test the ground. Transfer weight. Extend one limb. Freeze. Wait. Listen. Extend the next. 72 pounds on her back. Rifle, ammunition, water, survival kit. The ghillie suit she'd modified herself with local vegetation and white fabric for snow cover. In full winter camouflage, lying still, she was indistinguishable from the 100 other snow-covered mounds scattered across the mountainside. She found a position on a rock shelf overlooking the valley and began her count. Through the night force scope, she mapped the enemy force. 35 fighters, 8 four-man fire teams, 1 command element. She identified the key targets: 2 team leaders, 1 radio operator, 3 shooters with optics. She didn't fire. Not yet. Understand the system before you break it. That's what her father had taught her. That's what every instructor since had reinforced. You don't just start shooting. You learn the pattern, find the rhythm. Then you introduce chaos at exactly the right moment to make the whole thing collapse. The temperature fell. Not gradually, suddenly, like someone had opened a door into winter and forgotten to close it. She felt it in her bones. Not as cold, as weight, like the air itself was pressing down on her. Water began to freeze in her canteen. She could hear the ice crystals forming, that particular sound that means, you're running out of time. She moved 5 meters in 90 minutes. Glacial progress toward a crack in the rocks barely wide enough to squeeze through. Inside, she packed snow over the entrance, creating a tiny air pocket where her body heat would reflect off the stone walls. It wasn't warm. It was the difference between dying tonight and dying tomorrow. She did the math. She always did the math. Caloric deficit, severe. She'd burned through her ready energy in the first 6 hours of patrol. Now her body was starting to consume itself. Hydration, critical within 12 hours. The water she had was freezing. She'd have to melt it with body heat, which would drop her core temperature further. Core temperature, dropping. Combat effectiveness window, maybe 24 hours, maybe less. 24 hours to break a force of 35. She closed her eyes. Not to sleep, to think. Somewhere in the valley below, 7 men were huddled in a ravine, protecting a wounded brother, counting ammunition, calculating odds, wondering if she was alive or dead. She thought about her mother, about that promise she'd made at age 7, sitting beside a hospital bed in a farmhouse in Colorado, holding a hand that was already more bone than flesh. Promise, Mama, you'll know when to rest. I promise, Mama. She'd broken that promise the day she enlisted. She'd broken it every day since. She'd broken it so many times that the breaking had become her identity. The woman who never rested, never stopped, never quit. But not because she was strong, because she was afraid of what would happen if she ever let herself be still. Thea opened her eyes. The darkness was complete. The cold was absolute. The odds were impossible. She checked her rifle, checked her ammunition, 87 rounds. Then she began to plan her war. The first kill came at dawn. Not dawn like the poets write about. No golden lights spilling over mountain peaks. No birds singing. Just a gradual shift from black to gray, from nothing to barely something. The kind of dawn that felt more like the world was too tired to stay dark, rather than too alive to remain asleep. Thea had been watching for 3 hours, not moving, barely breathing, becoming part of the landscape in a way that transcended camouflage. It wasn't about looking like a rock, it was about being a rock, about letting your mind settle into the same patient stillness that stone achieves over centuries. Through her scope, she studied the enemy positions. 2 men at an observation post 340 meters north. One was awake, scanning the valley with binoculars. The other sat beside him, hunched over a long-range radio set, adjusting frequencies, not paying attention because he thought someone else was doing the watching. That was the one she wanted. Not the obvious target, not the man looking for threats. The man next to him, invisible in his ordinariness, critical to enemy command and control. She did the math without thinking. 340 meters, crosswind, 15 knots, right to left, cold air, dense, less bullet drop than standard conditions, temperature minus 20 Celsius, barrel cold. First round would shoot slightly different than subsequent rounds, but at this range, the difference was negligible. She calculated the way pianists find keys without looking. Muscle memory married to mathematics, married to something deeper that had no name. Her finger found the trigger. Not pulling, just resting, feeling the break point, that infinitesimal space between decision and action. She waited for the pause between heartbeats, that fraction of a second when the human body is stillest. Then she squeezed. The suppressor reduced the sound to a sharp crack, like a branch breaking under snow. The round covered the distance in less than a second, entered the radio operator's upper chest, just below the collarbone, punched through the lung, the subclavian artery, exited below the shoulder blade. He died before the pain signal reached his brain. His partner spun at the wet, flat sound of impact, like a hand slapping meat. He screamed into the radio, commands overlapping, panic spreading through the frequency like blood through water. Nobody knew where the shot had come from. Thea had already displaced. Low-crawled 6 meters to a secondary position she'd identified 3 hours earlier. By the time the enemy started shooting back, she was behind different rocks at a different angle. Invisible again. She waited 40 minutes before taking the second shot. That was the strategy her father had taught her when she was 16, hunting elk in these same mountains. 1 shot, 1 kill, then vanish. Wait. Let the fear build. Let them search for a threat they can't find. Let the waiting do more damage than the bullet. Psychological warfare wasn't about breaking the enemy's ability to fight. It was about breaking their willingness to try. 40 minutes later, she fired again. A team leader crossing open ground. 290 meters. Clean hit. Center mass. He dropped like someone had turned off a switch. Then 3 hours of silence. 3 hours where 35 men stared into the mountains, jumping at shadows, flinching at wind, waiting for a bullet that might never come or might come right now. In the ravine, Lieutenant Commander Garrett Steele pressed his back against stone and listened to the sound of nothing. That was somehow worse than the sound of gunfire. Gunfire meant someone was alive enough to shoot. Silence meant the war had moved somewhere he couldn't see. Chief, status on Whitmore. Marcus Brennan didn't look up from his work. His hands moved in the dark with the efficiency of a man who treated battlefield wounds more times than he could count. Pressure here, gauze there, tourniquet tight enough to stop arterial flow, but not so tight it caused permanent damage. Shrapnel tore through the bicep and nicked the brachial artery. I've got a tourniquet on it, but he needs surgery. 12 hours, maybe less. After that, he loses the arm. He paused, recalculated. After 18, we lose him. Whitmore was conscious, barely. His face had gone the color of old newspaper. His lips moved without sound. Then the sound came. Thin, distant, like someone talking in their sleep. Claire, his wife's name, 26 years old, 5 months pregnant, waiting in an apartment in San Diego for a phone call that would either tell her he was coming home or that he wasn't. Kyle Ashford knelt beside the wounded corpsman. At 22, he was the youngest operator on the team, still trying to prove he belonged. Hey, Jason, stay with me, man. You're going to be fine. You hear me? You're going to be fine. Whitmore's eyes found Ashford's face. Something like recognition flickered there. Then they drifted again, focusing on something beyond the physical world, beyond pain, beyond the present moment. Tell her I'm sorry I missed the ultrasound. You're going to tell her yourself. Shut up and save your energy. Dylan Cormack appeared at Steele's shoulder. His voice had changed. Gone was the bravado, the swagger, the casual cruelty. What remained was the Cormack who showed up when things went bad enough to burn away everything except truth. 6 tangos on the ridgeline, spread out. They're setting observation posts. Systematic. Whoever's running their show knows what he's doing. How long before they find us? Depends on how hard they look. This ravine's a dead end, Garrett. One way in, one way out. If they push a squad down that throat, we're fighting from a coffin. Steele knew. He'd known the moment he'd led them in here. The ravine was survival, not strategy. It had stopped the bleeding, bought them time, but time was a loan with interest that compounded by the minute. Options. Cormack hesitated. That alone told Steele everything. Cormack never hesitated. We split, 2 groups. One draws fire east. The other pushes north toward the LZ with Whitmore. It's ugly, but... No. Brennan's voice cut through from where he was working on Whitmore. He didn't look up, didn't stop his hands from moving, but his tone carried the weight of 20 years in special operations. We split this team, we die in pieces. We stay together, we move together, we fight together. Together where, Chief? Cormack's frustration leaked through. We're boxed in. Radio's getting interference from the terrain. No air support. No QRF. We've got a wounded man who can't walk straight and enough ammo to fight for maybe 40 minutes. Where exactly do you want us to go together? Anywhere but here. That's not a plan. Neither is splitting up. Steele raised his hand. Both men went quiet. 14 years of command compressed into one gesture. Nobody splits. We move at 0400 before first light. Push northwest toward the primary LZ. 3 clicks through the valley. Cormack on point. Chief with Whitmore. Everyone else fills in. We move fast and we move quiet. Cormack stared at him. With what? Harsh language? Steele almost smiled. Almost. With whatever we've got. That's what we've always done. Then they heard it. A single gunshot. Distant, North, maybe 400 meters out. Everyone froze. Weapons came up instinctively. Fingers found triggers. Eyes searched the darkness for muzzle flash, for movement, for any indication of where the round had come from or where it was going. Nothing. Just the echo rolling through the mountains like a stone dropped into a deep well. 2 minutes of silence, long enough for Cormac to convince himself it was nothing. Could be hunters, local militia, could be anything. Then the second shot, same direction, same caliber, same precise, deliberate spacing. The rhythm of someone who was choosing targets, not spraying fire. Brennan's hands stopped moving on Whitmore's bandage. He looked up. His voice was quiet, final. That's a 7.62, precision rifle, suppressed. He paused. Same caliber she carries. Cormac started to object. That doesn't mean that's her. The certainty in Brennan's voice silenced the ravine. Nobody spoke. The wind filled the space where words should have been. Somewhere north of them, 400 meters into the frozen darkness. Thea Blackwood was alive, and she was shooting. Steele processed it in 3 seconds. If Blackwood was engaging targets to the north, she was between them and the enemy's northern positions. She was either fighting her way out or fighting to keep those positions from closing the gap. "We move now," he said. "While they're distracted, whatever she's doing up there, she just bought us a window. We don't waste it." They moved like wounded animals, slow, careful, every step costing more than the last. 7 men and 1 wounded, pushing through snow that grabbed at their boots like wet concrete. Whitmore slung between Brennan and Ashford, arms over their shoulders, feet dragging. Travis Kane and Scott Barrett on the flanks, Cormac on point. Sullivan behind him, Steele in the center, compass in one hand, weapon in the other. 100 meters every 10 minutes. Agonizing. A healthy man could cover that distance in 60 seconds. But they weren't healthy men carrying a healthy load. They were exhausted, freezing, half-deaf from the ambush, dragging a teammate whose blood was leaving a trail in the snow that anyone with a flashlight could follow from half a mile away. Steele counted steps, counted minutes, counted the rounds remaining in his magazine. Counting was how he stayed sane. Counting was how he kept the fear locked in the box where it belonged. Then Ashford whispered, "Sir, look." Steele looked down, boot print in the snow. Fresh, small, size 7, military tread pattern. Then nothing. The prints appeared for 3 meters and then vanished, as if whoever made them had simply stepped off the earth. Brennan saw it too. "She's alive." "She's more than alive," Steele said, studying the prints. "The spacing, the depth. She's ahead of us." "How?" "She was behind us when we lost her. She'd have to go around the entire enemy position to get ahead of us. In the dark. Alone. Through 35 hostiles." Steele didn't answer, because the only answer that made sense was the one that didn't make sense at all. They pushed on. Another 100 meters. Another 10 minutes of grinding, brutal progress through snow and darkness. Sullivan held up a fist. Everyone stopped. "Contact," he whispered. 20 meters. 4 men crossing our path. Steele's stomach dropped. 4 armed men directly in their route. With Whitmore barely conscious and ammo running low, a firefight here would be catastrophic. It would give away their position, bring every hostile in the valley down on them, and burn through ammunition they couldn't replace. He was calculating how to detour when the shot came. 1 round. From the east this time, not north. A sharp, flat crack that echoed once and died. One of the 4 men on the patrol stumbled sideways and collapsed. The other 3 hit the ground, weapons up, searching wildly for a target they couldn't see. A second shot, another man down. The remaining 2 scrambled west, away from the team's route, firing blindly into the tree line at an enemy that wasn't there. Cormac turned around. His face held something Steele had never seen in 14 years of service. Not in 6 deployments, not in 100 firefights. It was awe. Jesus Christ, Cormac breathed. She's not lost. She's clearing the route. Steele didn't respond. He just pointed forward. Move now while the path is open. They moved. And for the next 2 hours, every time they approached a danger point, a ridgeline, a choke point, an intersection where enemy patrols should have been waiting, a shot would ring out somewhere ahead or to the side. One shot, sometimes two, never more. And the obstacles that should have stopped them simply weren't there when they arrived. Thea was out there in the dark, alone, with no radio, no support, no backup, no extraction plan. And she was systematically dismantling every threat between them and the landing zone. Not by fighting through the enemy, by anticipating their movements, getting ahead of their patrols, removing the pieces that mattered before the team ever reached them. Sullivan was the first to say it out loud. She's playing chess. We're the king. She's every other piece on the board. Cormac was silent for a long moment. Then so quietly only Sullivan heard, $20. I bet $20 fucking dollars she'd quit. Sullivan glanced at him. Cormac's jaw was working. Not anger, something raw. I called her dead weight. Cormac's voice cracked on the last word. Said she'd get us killed. Dylan, she's out there alone, saving us, and He stopped, couldn't finish. Sullivan put a hand on his shoulder, said nothing. Because there was nothing to say. Cormac wiped his face, adjusted the AK-47 slung across his chest. If we make it out, he said, I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to become half the soldier she is. It wasn't an apology, it was a vow. This is what was happening 400 meters ahead while 7 men dragged their wounded brother through the snow. Thea had identified 14 critical targets, not the most dangerous, the most disruptive. The team leaders who coordinated movement, the radio operators who maintained communication, the designated marksmen who provided overwatch. Kill the right 14, and a force of 35 becomes a collection of frightened individuals with no command structure and no situational awareness. But 14 targets required precision, required timing, required understanding not just where they were, but where they would be. She'd spent 3 hours mapping their patterns. Shift changes happened every 4 hours, radio checks every 30 minutes. Observation posts rotated personnel every 2 hours to prevent fatigue. Patterns. Everything was patterns if you watch long enough. She took the third shot at hour 15. A designated marksman moving to a new position. 410 meters. Wind had shifted, now coming from the northwest at 20 knots. She adjusted her hold, calculated the drift, squeezed. Miss. The round sparked off stone 6 inches from the target's head. He dove for cover, scrambling, not returning fire, not holding his post, just crawling backward on his belly until the rocks hit him, then running. Thea had missed. It happened. Even the best shooters in the world, under perfect conditions, hit their target 19 times out of 20. She was operating in conditions that were the opposite of perfect, exhausted, hypothermic, running on fumes. But the miss worked in her favor, because now the enemy knew she wasn't infallible. That meant they'd have hope. And hope made people do predictable things. She displaced again, moved 80 meters in 4 minutes. Her left foot was completely numb now. Not cold, not painful, just absent, like it belonged to someone else and she was borrowing it. From the new position, she engaged the 4th observation post, 370 meters. The man there went down, then return fire started. Someone in the compound had finally spotted her muzzle flash. Rounds cracked past her head. Close, angry, the sound of air being torn apart at supersonic speed. She rolled left, crawled, rolled again. A bullet hit the rock where her head had been half a second earlier. Stone fragments sprayed across her back, stinging through the ghillie suit. She ran. Ran was generous. She dragged herself through the snow at a speed that might have been faster than walking, but couldn't honestly be called running. Her left foot was a dead anchor. Her right was failing. Every step sent fire through muscles that had been breaking down for hours. 90 seconds. That's how long the fire lasted before she vanished into the white again. 90 seconds of hell, then silence. She found a depression in the rocks and collapsed into it. Not sitting, not lying down, just stopping. Her body had reached the point where transitions between positions required conscious decisions. Tell the right arm to extend. Tell the left leg to bend. Tell the torso to rotate. Automatic movement was gone. Everything was manual now. She looked through the scope one final time. The corridor between the team's position and the landing zone was open. Not safe. Safe didn't exist here, but open. The observation posts were empty or abandoned. The remaining enemy fighters were clustered in defensive positions, no longer patrolling, no longer attacking, just surviving. She'd done it. The thought arrived without emotion. No satisfaction, no relief, just mathematical confirmation that the problem had been solved. The corridor was clear. The team could move. Whitmore could reach a surgeon. 7 men could go home. Thea lowered the scope. Her arms fell to her sides like they'd been cut from puppet strings. She sat in the snow and breathed. Just breathed. For the first time in 68 hours, she allowed herself 10 seconds of not scanning, not calculating, not targeting, not moving. 10 seconds. Then she stood. Because standing was what the mission required. And the mission wasn't over until she was on that helicopter with him. Viktor Volkov sat in the stone shelter and counted the cost. 47 years old, ex-Spetsnaz, 23 years of combat across 3 continents. He'd survived ambushes that killed half his unit. He'd walked through minefields that claimed men on either side of him. He'd been shot twice, stabbed once, and left for dead in a ditch outside Grozny before crawling 10 kilometers to friendly lines. He knew war the way fishermen know the sea. Not from books, from drowning and choosing to swim anyway. And right now, the sea was turning against him. 5 dead, 2 wounded, 0 contact with the shooter. Not a footprint, not a shell casing, not a muzzle flash that gave away a position long enough to return fire effectively. His men were being picked apart by something they couldn't see, couldn't hear, and couldn't find. And the fear was spreading faster than he could contain it. A young fighter named Dmitri came in, shaking, not from cold, from something deeper. We found Alexei's position. Post 3. Volkov waited. He's gone. Radio was still transmitting when we arrived. But Alexei... Dmitri stopped, swallowed. Position was empty. His gear was there. Weapon, radio, pack, all arranged neatly, like someone was organizing a display. But Alexei was gone. Tracks? 10 meters, then nothing, like he walked into the air. Volkov felt something cold move through his chest. Not fear, recognition. He'd heard stories like this before. From his grandfather who'd fought in Afghanistan in the 80s, about Mujahideen snipers who would infiltrate a Soviet convoy and make men disappear one by one until the survivors refused to leave their vehicles. The ghost snipers, they'd called them, men who moved like spirits, who appeared from nowhere, killed with a single shot, then vanished back into the mountains. But those were stories, propaganda, the kind of thing old soldiers told to make their wars sound more dramatic than they were. Except now, he was living one. Pull everyone back, Volkov said. Full defensive posture, 4 observation posts, 360 coverage. Nobody works alone. Nobody moves without a partner. Dmitri hesitated. And the Americans? The Americans are boxed in a ravine with a wounded man and no radio. They're not going anywhere. He paused. We find the ghost first, kill the threat we can't see, then we finish the threat we can. But even as he said it, Volkov knew it was a lie. Because you can't kill a ghost. You can only wait for it to decide whether to kill you. Outside, his men were clustering in groups of 3 and 4, pressed against rocks, Weapons pointed outward at nothing. Nobody wanted to be alone. Nobody wanted to be the next one. He recognized what he was looking at, the posture of men who'd stopped being soldiers and started being prey. One of them, barely 18, was reciting prayers in a continuous whisper. Another had started calling the sniper Prizrak, the Wraith, the Ghost, a spirit sent to punish them. Volkov wanted to scream at them, wanted to grab them by their collars and shake them until the superstition fell out. But he couldn't, because some part of him, the old part, the part that still remembered his grandfather's stories, felt it too. Thea used the tip of her knife to scratch an arrow in the frozen ground, crude but unmistakable, pointing northeast. Below the arrow, she scratched a number, 800. 800 meters to the landing zone. Her hands were shaking so badly, the lines looked like they'd been drawn by someone having a seizure. But the message was clear enough. She looked at her left boot, knew what was inside it, white, waxy flesh. No sensation when she'd pressed it an hour ago. Grade 3 frostbite, the kind that cost people their feet. She didn't take the boot off to check, because if she did, the swelling would make it impossible to put back on. And she was walking off this mountain on her own feet. 5 AK-47s, 1 PKM machine gun, 8 8x16s, 5 AK-47s, 1 PKM machine gun, 8 magazines, 4 grenades. Stack them neatly on a flat rock where the team's route would take them right past. Not for her. She had everything she needed. This was for them, for the final push, for when the corridor she'd opened tried to close again. She checked her ammunition. 34 rounds remaining. Checked her body. Left foot dead. Right foot failing. Core temperature 94 degrees Fahrenheit. Severe hypothermia. Vision tunneling. Kidneys aching. That dull, persistent pain in her lower back that she recognized from cold weather training as the first sign of organ shutdown. 12 hours, she'd estimated at the beginning. 12 hours of combat effectiveness. That was 6 hours ago. She was operating on borrowed time now, running on something deeper than training, deeper than discipline. The override state. That place where the mission becomes the only thing that exists, where the body screams for rest and warmth and safety get routed to a dead mailbox. She'd seen other operators hit the override state. Some came back. Some pushed too far and crossed a line they didn't know was there. The line between pushing through extreme stress and actively dying. Thea didn't know which side of that line she was on, and it didn't matter. She began walking toward the landing zone, not because she wanted to, because the mission required it. 800 meters. At her current speed, maybe 40 minutes, maybe an hour. She didn't have an hour. She walked anyway. One step, then another, counting each one because counting was the last thing keeping her conscious. Step 47, step 48, step 49. The wind hit her face and she didn't feel it. That should have scared her. It didn't. Fear required energy she didn't have. Step 83, step 84. Somewhere behind her, Viktor Volkov stared at empty observation posts and silent radios and blood on his hands that had belonged to men who trusted him to keep them alive. Viktor Volkov stood in the stone shelter, staring at nothing. Outside, his remaining men huddled in groups. 18 left, from 40, in less than 3 days. Dmitri approached carefully. "Commander, the Americans, the helicopter took them." Volkov said nothing. "Should we pursue? The route is still—" "No." Dmitri waited. Volkov had never retreated before. Not in 23 years. Not from superior forces. Not from impossible odds. Never. "We're leaving," Volkov said. His voice was flat, empty. The voice of a man who'd seen something that broke the rules he'd spent 2 decades learning. "Burn everything. No evidence we were here." "But Commander, the mission." "The mission is over." Volkov looked at Dmitri, really looked at him. The young man saw something in his commander's eyes he'd never seen before. Fear. Not of death. Volkov had made peace with death years ago. This was something else. Fear of understanding, of knowing that all his experience, all his training, all his years of survival meant nothing against that. "I've fought armies," Volkov said quietly, "survived ambushes, minefields, artillery strikes. I know war. I know soldiers." He paused, looked out at the mountains where his men had died, where tracks appeared for 10 meters and then vanished, where a single shooter had turned 40 fighters into frightened children hiding from shadows. That wasn't war. That was something else. He walked to the door, stopped, turned back. "Tell the men, we saw nothing, heard nothing. Whoever asks about this operation, we were never here." Because you can't report losing to a ghost. You can't admit that one woman walked through your best defenses like they were paper, that she killed your men, broke your command structure, and left you too terrified to even look for her. You can only pretend it never happened and hope the ghost never comes back. Dmitri left to relay the orders. Volkov remained alone in the shelter. He pulled out a flask, took a long drink. His hands were shaking. In 23 years of combat, Viktor Volkov's hands had never shaken. Until now. Step 112. Step 113. Thea's vision tunneled to a single point of light ahead of her. The rest of the world had gone dark. She couldn't feel her hands on the rifle, couldn't feel the pack on her back, couldn't feel anything except the mechanical rhythm of muscles firing on commands that came from somewhere deeper than her brain. Step 150. She stopped counting. The numbers had stopped meaning anything. There was only forward, only the next step, only the landing zone somewhere ahead in the white, where 7 men were waiting for a helicopter that would take them home. She would get there, or she would die walking. Either way, she would not stop. The team found the weapons cache at 0547 hours. Travis Kane saw it first, a glint of metal beside a boulder that shouldn't have been there. He approached carefully, weapon up, expecting a trap. What he found instead made him stop breathing for 3 full seconds. 5 AK-47 rifles, 1 PKM machine gun, 8 full magazines, 4 fragmentation grenades, all laid out in a neat row on a flat rock, like items in a museum display case. "Contact," Kane called softly, but there was no threat in his voice, just confusion, wonder. The team converged. Steele looked at the weapons, looked at the positioning, deliberate, organized. Impossible to miss if you were moving along this exact route. These hadn't been dropped by retreating fighters. They'd been collected, gathered from enemy positions, and placed here specifically for the team to find. Brennan picked up one of the AKs, checked the action, loaded, ready to fire. He looked at Steele with an expression that held no words, because words were insufficient. "She's telling us to arm up," Sullivan said quietly. "She's expecting contact ahead." Cormac grabbed the PKM, checked the belt, 200 rounds. He slung it over his shoulder without a word. The familiar weight of a heavy weapon changed something in his posture. He stood straighter, moved with a confidence that had been fading over the past 6 hours. The team armed up, extra magazines distributed, grenades pocketed. In 30 seconds, their firepower had tripled. Scott Barrett held up one of the AKs and turned it slowly in his hands. She took these off dead men, in between shooting, moving, navigating, freezing, starving. She stopped to collect weapons she didn't need, so we'd have them when we did. Nobody responded, because there was no response adequate to that level of tactical foresight combined with that degree of physical sacrifice. They moved on. 500 meters to the landing zone, then 400, then 300. The terrain opened up. The tree line fell away, replaced by open ground covered in snow. Flat, exposed, no cover for 200 meters in any direction. Steele's gut tightened. This was the killing ground. If the enemy had anyone left with the discipline and courage to set an ambush, this is where it would happen. Open terrain, no cover. A team bunched up around a wounded man. One machine gun positioned on the high ground could cut them all down in seconds. "I don't like this," Cormac said. "Nobody likes it. We crossed that open ground, we're targets for 6 minutes minimum. That's a long time to be naked. Got a better idea?" Cormac looked at the PKM on his shoulder, then at the open ground, then at Whitmore, whose eyes had closed and whose breathing had gone shallow and fast. The breathing of a man whose body was starting to shut down systems it considered non-essential. "No," Cormac said. "Let's go." They went. 200 meters of open white, and every step felt like walking across a stage under a spotlight. Steele expected the first shot with every heartbeat, expected the crack of a rifle, the thump of an RPG, the staccato roar of a PKM opening up from a concealed position. Nothing came. Nothing came because there was nobody left to send it. Every observation post that had covered this approach was empty. Every patrol that should have been watching this route had been killed, scattered, or terrorized into retreat. The corridor that Thea had spent 70 hours clearing was exactly what she designed it to be. A path through the enemy, straight to the landing zone, bought and paid for with blood and frostbite and a kind of endurance that didn't have a name. They reached the LZ at 0612 hours. Brennan pulled the rescue beacon from his pack, powered it on, set it in the snow. The LED blinked green, signal sent. Now they waited. Waiting was its own kind of hell. Steele set security. Cormac with the PKM covering north. Sullivan and Kane covering east. Barrett and Ashford covering south and west. Brennan stayed with Whitmore, monitoring his pulse, his breathing, the color of his skin, watching for the signs that would tell him whether the helicopter was coming in time or whether they'd be bringing home a body. 10 minutes. The LED blinked. Green, green, green. Whitmore's breathing changed, shorter, faster, a wet sound underneath it that Brennan recognized and hated. Fluid in the lungs, shock doing what shock does when it goes on too long. "Chief," Steele's voice was tight, "he's compensating. His body's pulling blood from the extremities to protect the core. It's buying time, but the clock's running." "How long?" Brennan didn't answer immediately. "In 30 minutes, it doesn't matter if it doesn't get here in 30 minutes. It doesn't matter if it gets here at all." 20 minutes. The LED blinked. Whitmore opened his eyes, looked at Brennan with sudden, sharp clarity. The kind of clarity that comes right before the lights go out. "Chief, I'm here, brother. I'm right here. Did we get her?" His voice was barely a whisper. "Blackwood, did we get her out?" Brennan's jaw flexed. "She's coming, Jason. She's on her way. Don't leave her out there. Promise me." "Nobody's leaving anybody." Whitmore's eyes closed again. His hand, which had been gripping Brennan's sleeve, relaxed. Not let go, relaxed. The difference between a man choosing to release and a man whose muscles had simply stopped receiving commands. "Chief," Steele's voice was barely audible. "He's alive, stable for now, but now is a very short window, sir." 30 minutes. The LED blinked. Ashford's voice cut through, low, urgent. "Movement, 12 o'clock, 100 meters." Every weapon in the perimeter swung north. Cormac racked the PKM's charging handle with a sound like a bone breaking. Kane's finger found his trigger. Barrett steadied his breathing. One figure, moving slowly through the snow, so slowly it might have been drifting rather than walking. A shape that was more snow than person, white and gray and shapeless, hunched forward, moving with the terrible, careful deliberation of someone whose body had almost completely stopped obeying. "Halt!" Cormac bellowed. His voice cracked on the word, though he'd never admit it. "Identify yourself." The figure stopped, swayed, For one horrible second, Steele thought it was going to fall. Just tip forward into the snow and not get up. Two hands rose, slowly, painfully, like each arm weighed 100 pounds. Then a voice, a woman's voice, barely audible over the wind, stripped down to a whisper that carried more weight than any shout. Wraith, Wraith, Wraith. The call sign. Correct. Authenticated. Steele's chest unlocked. He hadn't realized he'd been holding his breath until the air came rushing out of him in a white cloud that the wind tore apart instantly. Hold fire, he said. Hold fire. It's Blackwood. The walk. She walked into the perimeter like a ghost becoming flesh. The ghillie suit was frozen solid, crusted with ice and snow, stiff as armor, cracking with each step like breaking glass. Her face was white, not cold white, dead white, the color of paper, of bone, of things that have had all the blood drained out of them. Her lips were purple. Her eyes, those gray-blue eyes that had looked at Steele with such calm certainty during the briefing 72 hours ago, were sunk deep in their sockets, rimmed with red, focused on nothing and everything at the same time. She was using the rifle as a crutch, the M110 SASS, a $30,000 precision weapon system planted in the snow with each step. Bearing weight it was never designed to carry, keeping her upright through sheer mechanical assistance because her legs had long since stopped doing the job on their own. Her left foot dragged, didn't bend, didn't flex, just scraped across the snow like a piece of wood bolted to her ankle. Cormac stared. The man who'd bet $20 she'd cry for evacuation. The man who'd called her dead weight, who'd questioned her worth, who'd made her arrival about his own wounded pride. He lowered the PKM, and the only words that came out of his mouth were the truest words he'd ever spoken. Jesus Christ. Thea didn't look at Cormac, didn't acknowledge him or anyone else. She walked straight to Whitmore, knelt beside him. The kneeling took 4 seconds and looked like it cost her everything she had left. She pressed 2 fingers against his neck. Her hand was shaking so violently she had to try 3 times before she found the pulse. She looked at Brennan. Pulse? 1 word, asking for numbers. 90 plus. Thready. Tourniquet time? 2 words. 7 hours. I've been loosening every 30 minutes. Thea nodded, touched Whitmore's forehead with the back of her hand. The gesture was surprisingly gentle. The first soft thing any of them had seen her do. Whitmore's eyes fluttered open, saw her face above him. Something like recognition passed through his expression. Relief, gratitude, the knowledge that against all odds, against all reason, he was going to see his wife again, going to meet his daughter. You made it, he whispered. Thea said nothing, just kept her hand on his forehead for another moment. Then she stood. The standing was worse than the kneeling. A slow, grinding process of getting one leg under her, then the other, then forcing her spine straight through what must have been extraordinary pain. She walked to the northern edge of the perimeter. 100 meters, she might hit it. At 100 meters, she might hit it. At 200, probably not. At 300, not a chance. It didn't matter. She was holding the line with nothing left in the tank except the fumes of a will that refused to acknowledge what her body already knew. She was holding the line. Steele went to her. Blackwood, you need medical attention. Now. 1 word. After. That's not a request. She turned her head just enough to meet his eyes. In that look was something Steele had seen only a handful of times in his career. The absolute, non-negotiable certainty of a person who has decided what they're going to do and will not be moved by argument, order, or force. Everyone on board first. 4 words, the most she'd said in 72 hours. Steele held her gaze for 3 seconds. Then he nodded. Because arguing with that look was like arguing with gravity. You could disagree all you wanted. It wouldn't change the outcome. Brennan brought water. She shook her head. He tried to drape a thermal blanket over her shoulders. She shrugged it off. He offered to move her to a sheltered position behind the rocks, where the wind couldn't reach her. I can see north from here. 5 words. Can't see north from there. Brennan looked at Steele. Steele shook his head slightly. Leave her. Snow began to accumulate on her shoulders, on her back, on the frozen ghillie suit that had become a second skin. She didn't brush it off, didn't move, just watched the north through a scope mounted on a rifle she probably couldn't fire accurately anymore, guarding a team that had already been saved by everything she'd done over the past 3 days. The sound came at 0647 hours, distant, rhythmic, the unmistakable whump, whump, whump of rotor blades beating cold air into submission. Sullivan heard it first. Bird inbound, southwest. Steele popped a smoke grenade. Green smoke spiraled upward, caught by the wind, marking their position against the white. The Black Hawk came in fast and low, nose up, snow blasting outward in a white hurricane as the wheels touched ground. The crew chief was already in the door, waving them in, shouting words that the rotor wash tore away before they reached anyone's ears. "Whitmore first!" Steele yelled. Brennan and Ashford lifted Whitmore between them and ran. The crew chief grabbed Whitmore under the arms and pulled him aboard. A flight medic was on him instantly. IV, oxygen, pressure on the wound. The practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times and never got used to it. Sullivan, Kane, Barrett, they piled in. Cormac climbed aboard with the PKM still slung across his back, turned, reached a hand down. "Blackwood, let's go!" She was still at her position, still watching north, snow on her shoulders, ice on her face, rifle up, finger indexed along the receiver. She hadn't moved. "Blackwood!" She lowered the rifle, slowly, like setting down something precious. Then she stood. This time the standing took 8 seconds. It involved using the rifle stock as a lever against the frozen ground, pushing herself upright through a series of motions that looked less like a human getting up and more like a machine executing a startup sequence with half its components damaged. She walked to the helicopter. Cormac reached down again. She looked at his hand, looked at it long enough that everyone in the bird thought she might not take it. Then she grabbed the doorframe instead. Both hands, shaking, fingers white, knuckles locked, and pulled herself aboard without assistance. She sat on the floor of the Black Hawk, back against the bulkhead, rifle across her lap. The crew chief tried to take it from her. Standard procedure, secure all weapons during flight. She looked at him with those hollow, sunken eyes. He backed off without a word. The bird lifted, the ground fell away. The mountains shrank beneath them, white peaks and dark valleys, and somewhere down there, 11 bodies in the snow, a destroyed radio, 6 abandoned positions, and a commander named Viktor Volkov staring at the sky as the helicopter carrying his enemies disappeared into the clouds. Steele sat across from Thea. She wasn't looking at him, wasn't looking at anything. Her eyes were open but unfocused, fixed on a point somewhere past the helicopter's walls, past the mountains, past everything. The 1,000-yard stare. He'd seen it before, on men who'd pushed past every limit the human body was supposed to have and come out the other side as something that looked like a person but wasn't quite sure it still was one. Brennan moved beside her, checked her pulse without asking, pulled off her left glove and looked at the fingers. 3 of them were white, waxy, the skin tight and shiny in a way that meant frostbite had gone deep. He started to reach for her boot. "Don't." One word. "I need to assess." FOB. One word. "Blackwood, if you take that boot off, the swelling will make it impossible to put back on." "Walking off on my feet." 5 words, each one costing her something. Brennan looked at Steele. Steele said nothing. Brennan sat back. Cormac was watching from across the cabin. The rotor noise made conversation impossible for anyone more than a foot apart. but Cormac was close enough to have heard the exchange. He stared at Thea with an expression that held no trace of the man who'd laughed 72 hours ago. That man was gone, killed somewhere in the mountains, buried under the weight of everything he'd witnessed, replaced by someone who understood something he'd never understood before. Ashford was crying, sitting beside Whitmore. Not for Whitmore. Whitmore was stabilized. The medic had given a thumbs up. He would keep his arm. He would see his wife. He would hold his baby. Ashford was crying for a reason he couldn't have articulated if someone had asked. Relief, exhaustion, the overwhelming recognition that he was 22 years old and had just witnessed something that most soldiers would never see in a lifetime of service. Thea's eyes closed, not sleep. She was too far past sleep for it to come that easily. Just closed. The muscles in her face relaxed for the first time in 72 hours. And in that relaxation, Steele could see the cost. Every line, every shadow, every hollow. The face of a 29-year-old woman who looked, at this moment, like she was 50. She'd gone in weighing 135 pounds. She'd come out weighing maybe 124. 11 pounds of muscle and water and warmth burned away in 3 days by a body that had been forced to consume itself to keep functioning. The helicopter banked south toward FOB Granite Peak. Below them, the mountains kept their secrets. The snow was already filling in the boot prints, the blood, the shell casings, the arrows scratched in frozen earth. By tomorrow, there would be no evidence that any of it had happened. Just white, just silence, just the mountains, indifferent as always, keeping no records, offering no testimony. But 7 men on that helicopter would remember. 7 men who'd been written off as dead, boxed in a canyon with a wounded brother and no way out. Saved by a woman who'd spent 72 hours alone in the worst conditions on Earth, fighting a war that nobody ordered her to fight, because she'd decided, in 3 seconds at the rear of a column, in the middle of an ambush, that their lives were worth more than her safety. The Black Hawk's wheels hit the tarmac at FOB Granite Peak, and Thea's eyes opened. Like a switch had been flipped. Not groggy, not slow, instant, the way a predator wakes, fully alert, scanning for threat before the conscious mind has time to form a thought. The crew chief slid the door open. Cold air rushed in. Medics were already running across the pad with stretchers, shouting to each other over the dying rotor wash. Whitmore went first, 4 hands lifting him, IV bags swinging. The flight medic barking vitals to the ground team as they transferred him. Ashford jumped out after, staying close to Whitmore's stretcher until a medic gently pushed him back and said, "We've got him, son. We've got him." Ashford stood on the tarmac and watched them carry Whitmore through the double doors of the field hospital. His lips moved, no sound. Might have been a prayer. Might have been Whitmore's wife's name. Might have been nothing at all. The rest of the team offloaded. Cormac, Sullivan, Kane, Barrett, Brennan, Steele last. The commander always leaves last, same way he enters first. 14 years of habit that lived in his bones. He turned back to the helicopter. Thea was still inside, sitting on the floor, rifle across her lap. She hadn't moved. Blackwood. She looked at him. Those gray-blue eyes emptied out, scraped hollow by 72 hours of cold and killing and the absolute expenditure of everything a human body and mind could give. "We're here," Steele said. "It's over." She nodded, set the rifle beside her on the floor with a care that contradicted every tremor in her hands. Then she gripped the doorframe and stood. The standing took 6 seconds. Each second was its own war. She stepped down from the helicopter, both feet on the tarmac, standing. A medic rushed toward her with a stretcher. She held up one hand. The medic stopped. "Walking," one word. "Ma'am, you need to—" "Walking," repeated, non-negotiable. She walked across the tarmac, through the door, down the hallway to the aid station. Each step was a controlled fall. Left foot planted without sensation. Right foot planted with fading sensation. Body swaying, correcting, swaying again. Cormac followed, 20 meters behind. He'd started following without deciding to. Just followed. The way you follow something you can't look away from. She made it to the aid station door, pushed it open, took one step inside. Then her left knee buckled. Sudden, total, like someone had removed the joint entirely. She went down. Brennan caught her. He'd been right behind Cormac, anticipating this exact moment. His arms went around her before she hit the floor, and for 1 second she was dead weight against his chest. 124 pounds of ice and exhaustion and used up will. Then she pushed him away, grabbed the doorframe, pulled herself upright. Fine. One word. You're not fine. Fine, repeated with steel. Brennan let go, stepped back, watched her walk to the exam table and sit down under her own power. He turned to Cormac, standing in the hallway. Cormac's face was doing something Brennan had never seen. A man trying to hold an expression together while everything behind it crumbled. Cormac opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. I was wrong, Cormac said. The words came out raw, unfiltered. About everything, about all of it. Brennan put a hand on his shoulder. Yeah, you were. How do I? Cormac stopped, shook his head. What do you say to someone who did that? Nothing, Dylan. You don't say anything. You just remember. The medical report took 3 hours to compile. Dr. Benjamin Cross sat across from Thea in the examination room and told her the truth. He was 45 years old, had treated combat casualties for 12 years. Thought he'd seen everything. He'd been wrong. Severe dehydration, 2nd and 3rd degree frostbite on both feet and 3 fingers of your left hand. Cold-induced muscle damage across major muscle groups. Corneal abrasions from wind and ice exposure. 11 pounds of body weight lost. He paused, looked at the lab results again, as if reading them a second time might change what they said. Your creatine kinase levels are so elevated, they indicate rhabdomyolysis. Your muscles were literally breaking down, dissolving their own tissue to fuel the demands you placed on them. He set the clipboard down, looked at her directly. Another 6 hours and you would have died. Your kidneys were heading toward failure. After that, cardiac arrest. Your body was consuming itself to stay functional. He leaned forward. Do you understand that? Thea looked at him. Yes. One word. And you stayed out there anyway. She didn't answer, because there was no answer that would make sense to someone who hadn't been in those mountains, hadn't looked through that scope, hadn't done the math and decided that 7 lives were worth more than 2 feet and 3 fingers and a body that might never fully recover. Dr. Cross stared at her for a long moment. Then he shook his head and started writing orders. Warm IV fluids, gradual rewarming protocol, monitoring for cardiac arrhythmia, renal function panels every 4 hours. He wrote it all down in neat, precise handwriting, understanding that medicine could fix the body, but couldn't touch whatever it was inside this woman that had allowed her to do what she'd done. Thea refused the bed. Dr. Cross argued. She won. She sat on the edge of the exam table while the IV dripped warmth back into her veins and asked for a clean uniform. 6 weeks later, the sun was setting over the mountains when Colonel Everett Grayson found Thea in the recovery ward. She was sitting by a window, looking out at peaks that were turning orange and gold in the dying light. Her left foot was wrapped in bandages, 3 toes gone. The right foot wrapped too, 1 toe missing. She would never deploy to cold climates again. The nerve damage was permanent. The cold sensitivity would last the rest of her life. But she was alive. Grayson sat down in the chair beside her, didn't speak immediately, just looked out at the mountains with her, sharing the silence, the way old soldiers do when words are insufficient. I'm retiring, he said finally. End of year. 30 years is enough. Thea said nothing, just waited. Command approved a new training program, Sniper Doctrine. Tactical decision-making under extreme conditions. He paused. They want you to design it. Why me? 2 words. Because you did what nobody thought possible. Because you survived something that should have killed you. And because... He stopped. This next part was harder. Your father called me. Thea turned to look at him. Really look at him. For the first time since he'd entered the room. He's sick, Thea. Lung cancer. Stage 4. They're saying 6 months. Maybe. The silence that followed was complete. Outside, the sun touched the horizon. The mountains held their breath. He wants to see you teach, Grayson continued. His voice was soft. Before he goes, he wants to know that what he gave you, that you're passing it on. A single tear ran down Thea's cheek. Just one. But it was the first crack in the armor she'd worn for 72 hours. For 6 weeks. For 29 years. She said nothing, but she nodded once. And Grayson understood that was all the answer she could give. 8 months later, the porch hadn't changed. Same worn wood, same view of the valley, same place where her father had taught her to shoot when she was 8 years old. And the world was simpler because her mother was still alive and death was something that happened to other people. Nathaniel Blackwood sat in his chair, 64 years old, thin in the way that cancer makes people thin, hollowed out, but his eyes were still sharp, still saw everything. Thea sat beside him. Her left foot ached. It always ached now when the temperature dropped, a permanent reminder. A price paid in flesh for decisions made in blood. They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that comes from years of saying everything that needed to be said, and now just existing in each other's presence was enough. Your mama would be proud, Nate said finally. Why? One word, still counting them, still choosing carefully. You kept the promise. You came home. Thea looked at him. Took me long time. 4 words. Doesn't matter. You made it. He reached beside his chair, picked up his old rifle. The Remington 700 she'd first fired when she was 8. Beaten, worn, scarred by decades of use. This is yours now. Teach them what I taught you. Thea took the rifle, cradled it the way you cradle something irreplaceable, something that carries weight beyond its physical mass. What about us? 3 words, asking about their legacy, about what they'd built together in the years between her mother's death and this moment. Nate looked at her, really looked at her, the way a father looks at a daughter when he knows time is running out and he wants to memorize everything. You are the legacy, Thea. You're the shot I'm most proud I ever took. Thea leaned her head on his shoulder. First time she'd shown this vulnerability in her entire adult life. First time she'd let herself be anything other than the soldier, the operator, the ghost. Just a daughter, sitting with her father, watching the sun set over the mountains they both loved. Camera pulled back, 2 figures on a porch. Sunset painting the sky in colors that had no names. A rifle between them. A legacy passing from one generation to the next.